In a quiet town tucked between the snowy hills of Montana, a single gunshot shattered the stillness, and a golden heart answered the call. Emily, a sheriff known for her strength, lay bleeding beneath a sky full of stars, with no voice left to call for help. But her silent guardian, a golden retriever named Bailey, ran through the night like an angel with fur. What happened next? Some call it instinct. Others call it a miracle, and somewhere in the quiet, a boy who never spoke whispered a name for the first time, Bailey. The sun rose slow and amber over Pinewood, Montana, casting long shadows across the sprawling wheat fields that rustled in the autumn wind like 1,000 whispers October had brought with it. A crisp chill, and the scent of snow hovered in the air like a distant promise. Pinewood, nestled between the sapphire-streaked ridges and icy creeks, was the kind of town where people still waved from their porches, where nothing ever happened until it did. Sheriff Emily Walker adjusted her worn leather gloves as she stepped out of her patrol truck boots, crunching on frozen grass. At 38, Emily was a commanding presence, tall with a strong jaw, sun-kissed skin, and eyes as green and alert as the pine forests that bordered the town. Her long auburn hair was pulled into a no-nonsense braid tucked neatly under her ranger hat. She moved with the calm assurance of someone who had once known chaos and had chosen peace. But beneath her collected demeanor was a quiet fire, tempered but burning. Trotting beside her as naturally as a shadow was Bailey, a 4-year-old golden retriever, with a gleaming coat and a gait both powerful and graceful. He was no ordinary dog. Bailey was a certified canine officer trained in tracking search and rescue and emotional response. His broad head, intelligent eyes, and feathered tail made him the unofficial sweetheart of Pinewood. But when it came to work, Bailey was as focused as any soldier. He had a unique ability, some called it instinct. Others, a gift for sensing unease before it took shape. They were on a routine sweep of the old Miller property, a once prosperous wheat farm, now swallowed by silence and overgrowth. The barn's red paint had faded to a dull rust, and its roof sagged like a tired sigh. Locals had whispered for weeks about flickering lights at odd hours, about low rumbles of trucks pulling in and out long after midnight. Emily wasn't one to chase rumors, but something about those calls, 2 in the last week, had left her uneasy. She clicked the truck's door shut and scanned the horizon. The wind tugged at her coat and carried the distant screech of a hawk overhead. Bailey was already a few feet ahead, nose down, tail lifted like a flag. Emily followed his lead. "Stay close," she murmured more out of habit than worry. Bailey didn't need reminders. As they crossed the brittle stubble of an old wheat plot, Emily noticed tire tracks fresh and deep pressed into the frozen earth. She knelt beside them, her gloved hand brushing along the edge. Too new to belong to a farmer, and they led straight to the barn. Bailey whined low in his throat. Not a warning, not quite, but enough to make her fingers drift toward the holster on her hip. The barn door was ajar. Only by a few inches, but enough to show it hadn't been closed properly. Emily raised a hand signaling Bailey to hold. He paused, ears alert, muscles taut. She approached slowly, every footstep deliberate. Her boots made no sound on the frosty ground. She reached the door, pressed her back against the wood, and listened. Nothing, just the groan of the structure in the wind. She pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old hay oil and something else metallic sharp. She moved in eyes adjusting to the gloom. Stacked crates, dusty tarp-covered equipment, broken tools scattered like bones. Then she saw it, scratches on the floor freshly made, and a pile of baled hay not settled like the rest, but hastily thrown. Emily approached, heart steady. Bailey entered behind her nose, twitching, sniffing the ground with growing urgency. He pawed at a corner of the hay pile, then looked at her with intensity in his gaze. "Good boy," she whispered. She knelt and lifted a section of the hay, beneath it a black duffel bag, heavy, zipped tight. She undid the zipper with careful hands and opened it just enough to see the contents rows of small sealed boxes with strange symbols etched in ink. She didn't need to open one to know what they likely were, weapons or drugs or both. Her jaw tightened. The Miller farm had been empty for a decade. No one had claimed it since old Joe Miller passed. So who was using it now? Bailey suddenly let out a soft growl. Low and cautious, Emily rose swiftly and turned toward the barn door, but there was nothing, just wind and waving grass. Still, she didn't like the feeling crawling up her spine. She zipped the bag closed and slung it over her shoulder. "We're not done here," she muttered to Bailey. "But we need backup." The dog moved beside her, his pace brisk and vigilant as they left the barn. The wheat fields hissed behind them, the sun now half shrouded in cloud. Emily's breath came out in clouds as she reached for the radio on her vest. "This is Sheriff Walker." She spoke, voice calm but clipped. "Suspicious activity confirmed at the Miller property. I need a unit out here and evidence collection. Possible narcotics or arms cache, proceed with caution." As she waited for the response, Bailey nudged her hand, a silent reassurance. "Yeah," she said softly, glancing down at him. "I feel it too." The radio crackled. "Copy that sheriff unit en route." They stood there for a moment, wind swirling around them. Behind the barn, the tire tracks led not just in but out. Whoever had been here, they were long gone, but they'd be back. And when they came, they wouldn't expect Bailey. The cold had settled deep over Pinewood by the time Emily Walker reached the old Miller property again. The moon hung low behind a shroud of clouds, casting the land in hues of gray and threat. The air was sharp enough to bite. Frost coated the wheat stalks, turning the field into a sea of brittle silver blades that whispered as they moved. Emily parked her truck off the narrow road, headlights off, and stepped into the stillness with Bailey at her side. Something didn't feel right. Bailey, her golden-furred partner, kept close, his warm breath fogging the air. His coat gleamed faintly in the moonlight, his ears stiff and forward. Emily gave him a glance. He was calm but focused. She trusted that more than any gut feeling. The barn stood like a skeleton in the dark, its frame groaning softly as the wind moved through its broken ribs. Emily moved carefully along the edge of the property, her flashlight turned low. Gun holstered but ready. She wasn't here for confrontation, just surveillance. Still, instinct hummed in her chest like a low siren. She reached the barn door and pushed it open slowly. A hinge squealed. Bailey followed her inside his paws, silent on the straw-dusted floor. Then it happened. A crack of sound, sharp and sudden. A gunshot. Emily gasped as pain seared through her side. The impact hit just below her ribs, spinning her backward into a pile of old crates. She hit the ground hard, the air forced from her lungs. The world dimmed, then rushed back, too bright. Her hand flew to her side, already sticky with blood. Bailey barked once, loud and fierce, the sound bouncing off the barn's interior like a war cry. He positioned himself between Emily and the direction of the shot, teeth bared, tail high. Somewhere beyond the rafters, she heard the sound of running footsteps, retreating, fading into the dark. Emily tried to push herself up. Her leg trembled. Her fingers reached for her radio, but when she pressed the button, only static answered. No signal. Too far from town, too deep into the hills. She turned to Bailey, her voice barely a whisper. "Bailey, go get help." The dog whined unwilling. "Go," she rasped, her free hand gripping his thick fur. Bailey stood frozen for a moment, torn. Then his ears flicked. His body tensed, and he ran. He sprinted through the barn door and into the night pause, kicking up frost and dirt as he leapt into the fields, vanishing into the dark sea of cold and wind. The wheat hissed around him a ghostly chorus. The moon above gave no warmth, but he ran anyway. His breath steaming, his heart fixed on one goal. He ran for her. He ran through the freezing Montana night, a golden shadow beneath the stars, crossing fields where only the wind had walked before. Snowflakes had begun to fall in pinewood, thin and quiet, dissolving as they touched the still warm ground. The night was windless now, the storm having passed, but the air still held the weight of something waiting. Bailey moved like a streak of gold through the outer edges of town breath, coming in hard, quick bursts, each paw strike a question of time. He knew these roads, he had trotted them in morning patrols, evening walks, school visits. But never like this, never with his heartbeat drumming the rhythm of desperation. A porch light flickered on as he passed, then another. He didn't stop. Not until he reached the small single-story house just 3 blocks from the Pinewood Sheriff's Station, the one with the blue wind chime shaped like a crescent moon that always jingled even when the air stood still. Inside the house, Noah Davis, an 8-year-old boy with tousled chestnut hair and round glasses too big for his face, sat curled on the living room carpet with his noise-canceling headphones on. He was building a tower out of wooden animal blocks, giraffes on elephants, lions under birds, his tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in focused silence. Noah didn't speak often. His world was made of patterns, predictability, quiet corners, but he noticed things other people missed: subtle shifts, rhythm, breaks, invisible tremors in a room. That night, he noticed something else. The sound came before the knock, the scratching frantic and sharp against the front door. He looked up, puzzled, then stood and padded barefoot to the window. When he saw Bailey, his Bailey, the golden dog who sometimes let him pet his ears outside the station, he froze. Bailey was wild-eyed, panting his tail, stiff, his fur clung wet with frost. He barked once, then pawed the door again. Noah stared. Then he turned and ran. In the back room. Sarah Davis, a woman in her late 30s with thick dark hair, pulled into a frizzy bun and deep creases around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, was folding laundry on the bed. A pediatric nurse at the Pinewood Medical Center. She carried the calm efficiency of someone who had seen the worst and refused to let it take her kindness. When Noah burst into the room and grabbed her hand without speaking, she didn't ask why, she just followed. He led her to the door and pointed. She opened it and gasped. "Bailey." She blinked. "Where's Emily?" The dog barked again and turned, trotting a few feet before looking back. Noah pulled at her sleeve. Sarah knelt, placed a hand on Bailey's chest, then touched his ear. It was ice cold. His eyes locked onto hers, wide pleading. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. "Get my bag," she said to Noah, her voice steady now. Quickly. The boy ran. She grabbed her coat, her phone, then turned to Bailey. "Show me." The golden retriever spun and took off. Sarah ran after him, heart pounding. Noah followed close behind, holding her medical kit, his little boots slapping against the sidewalk. Bailey led them across town, past shuttered shops and darkened homes, through back alleys and shortcut trails, known only to those who walked them often. The snow had thickened now, drifting in lazy spirals beneath the streetlights. Sarah had no idea where they were going. She just ran. Noah, breathless, kept pace without complaint. Eyes focused, silent. Bailey glanced back occasionally, slowing slightly when the terrain grew rough, making sure they followed. The further they went, the colder the air bit, but neither human nor dog stopped. They reached the edge of the wheat fields. The Miller property loomed in the distance, its silhouette jagged like something long forgotten. Bailey stopped at the edge of the barn, whined once and backed up. Sarah pushed open the barn door. Her breath caught. There, half hidden behind a pile of old wooden crates, lay Emily Walker, her uniform stained with blood, her skin-pale lips parted as though she had been mid-command before the world slipped sideways. Her hand was clenched against her side, but the pressure had failed. Blood pooled dark against the straw. "Noah, stay here." Sarah dropped to her knees beside Emily, already pulling gloves on her voice, switching into the crisp cadence of experience. "Emily, it's Sarah Davis. I'm here." Emily's eyelids fluttered. "Hey," she whispered. Sarah touched her cheek. "You're safe now. I need to stop the bleeding. Noah's with me." Bailey brought us. Emily's eyes flicked toward Bailey and her lips moved, but the sound was too faint to catch. Sarah opened the kit, cleaned the wound, and packed gauze against it, wrapping tight as she could. She didn't have everything she needed, but she had enough to buy them time. She turned to Noah, phone, call Marcus. Noah hesitated, then nodded. He pulled Sarah's phone from her coat pocket, found the saved contact with a red star, Deputy Marcus Klein, and pressed call. When Marcus answered, all he heard was one word. Emily, Noah said, then handed the phone to his mother. Sarah took over fast and direct. "It's Sarah Davis. Emily's been shot at the Miller farm. Bring an ambulance." Now, as they waited, Bailey curled against Emily's side, body pressed close, radiating warmth. Sarah looked at the dog. "You saved her," she whispered. "You beautiful, impossible thing, you really saved her." The blare of sirens cut through the quiet of the Montana night like a scream in a cathedral. Red and blue lights flickered across frost-bitten wheat, and the rotting planks of the Miller barn as the Pinewood ambulance came skidding to a halt. Snow fell heavier now, blanketing the landscape in white silence, as if trying to cover the violence that had unfolded. Two paramedics jumped from the vehicle. Leading them was Jesse Ortega, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a weather-worn face, olive skin, and a no-nonsense air about him. His thick black hair was slicked back beneath a knit beanie, and he moved with the efficient calm of someone who had long learned to put fear second to duty. His partner, Tamika Hayes, was lean and quick, a woman in her early 30s with dark skin, short-cropped curls, and an intuitive grace in her movements. She had a voice like warm thunder, and was known around town for her ability to calm panicked patients without ever raising her voice. They found Emily exactly where Sarah had described, half-conscious, wrapped in makeshift gauze, her lips pale and eyes fluttering. Sarah knelt beside her, hands bloodied but steady. Noah stood a few feet away, watching silently, holding Bailey's leash tightly in both hands. His eyes, though wide, were no longer filled with fear, but with focus. "She's stabilized for now," Sarah said, as Jesse dropped to his knees beside her wounds, under the rib cage, low bleeding pressure but consistent. I packed and wrapped it. "No exit wound." Jesse glanced at her, impressed. "You a trauma nurse, pediatrics?" Sarah replied, "But emergencies don't care about specialties." Tamika took Emily's vitals while Jesse unpacked their kit. Within minutes, they had Emily on a stretcher. Eye lines flowing an oxygen mask over her mouth. Bailey whimpered when they lifted her tail low, but still as if refusing to move until he was sure she was safe. Sarah gently took his face in her hands. "She's going to be okay," she said softly. "You did your part." But Bailey didn't move until Noah stepped forward and touched his fur. Only then did Bailey follow, trotting alongside the stretcher as they wheeled Emily into the ambulance. Inside the ambulance, Jesse nodded toward the dog. "He coming with, he's not leaving," Tamika said simply. "Let him ride." They made space on the floor, and Bailey lay there pressed against the metal base of the stretcher, watching Emily's face with unblinking loyalty. Back at Pinewood Medical Center, a small two-wing hospital tucked behind a grove of fir trees, Dr. Eleanor Shaw stood waiting at the emergency entrance. Eleanor was in her early 50s, tall and sharp-featured with streaks of silver in her dark red hair, and a voice that always sounded like it had more important things to say. She had run Pinewood's ER for 10 years and had no tolerance for incompetence or delay. When she saw Emily's stretcher, she raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" "Gunshot," Jessie replied. "Right side, no exit." She was out in the fields alone. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Get her inside, prep for OR." They rushed down the hall, and Bailey followed until they reached the surgical wing. When a nurse tried to stop him, he growled, not viciously but with enough warning that she backed off. "Let him stay close," Eleanor said as she disappeared into the operating room. "That dog just saved her life." Sarah and Noah arrived, moments later, led by Carla Morris, the young dispatcher from the night before, who had met them outside the hospital. She still wore her hoodie from the station, her eyes red from too much adrenaline and too little sleep. She guided them to the waiting room. Sarah sat on the edge of a plastic chair, staring at the doors. Her hands still trembled from the adrenaline come-down. Noah sat beside her, clutching the worn leather strap of Bailey's leash. The leash was empty now. Bailey was outside the OR, lying flat against the wall head, on his paws, unmoving. He hadn't barked, hadn't whined. He simply waited, a sentinel made of gold and loyalty. An hour passed. Then another. In that time, Sarah watched something change in Noah. He didn't retreat to a corner. He didn't put on his headphones. He sat, quiet but alert. Every time someone walked past in scrubs, he looked up. When Bailey shifted and let out a soft breath, Noah stood and walked to him. He sat down beside the dog, placed a hand gently on his back, and just stayed. Carla noticed. "He doesn't usually do that." She asked Sarah softly. Sarah shook her head. "He doesn't usually do any of this." Outside the OR, a clock ticked loudly. Bailey's tail thumped once against the floor. He raised his head, the doors opened. Dr. Shaw emerged, peeling off her gloves. She looked tired, but not grim. "She's stable," she said. "We removed the bullet. She lost a lot of blood, but the wound missed major organs. She'll need rest, and we'll monitor for internal bleeding. But she's alive, thanks to all of you." Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Carla nodded slowly. Noah blinked, but said nothing. His hand remained on Bailey's fur. "You can see her once she's moved," Shaw added. Then she looked at Bailey. "And I suppose he'll be first in line." Later that night, Emily was wheeled into a recovery room. The light was dim, machines humming gently. Bailey was allowed inside. He padded across the tile floor and placed his head gently on the edge of the bed. Emily stirred, opened her eyes slowly, and smiled faintly. "You again," she whispered. Bailey licked her hand once and stayed in the waiting room. Sarah leaned her head back against the wall and looked at her son. He was curled against the bench, one hand still holding Bailey's leash, even in sleep. "You saved her too," she whispered. "You little hero." The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft, methodical beeping of the heart monitor and the occasional rustle of cotton sheets. Snow now blanketed the town of Pinewood in thick, white silence, muting everything beyond the frost-rimmed windows. Morning light filtered through the blinds in soft slats across Emily Walker's bed, striping her bandaged torso and casting long shadows beneath her eyes. Emily sat up slowly, her back supported by a wedge of pillows. Her auburn hair, usually tied back in a neat braid, now fell loose and tangled around her shoulders. Her green eyes, once sharp and unreadable, were distant, unfocused. The bullet wound below her ribs ached constantly, a dull reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. But it wasn't the pain that consumed her. It was the guilt. She had trained for years to anticipate danger, to read a scene before it unfolded. She prided herself on her instincts on staying 2 steps ahead, and yet she'd walked straight into an ambush alone without backup. She should have known better. And the thought echoed endlessly in her mind. What if Bailey hadn't made it? What if she had taken a second bullet? What if Noah hadn't understood? Her thoughts spiraled. Bailey, lying curled at the foot of her hospital bed, lifted his head. His golden fur glowed in the light, like something angelic. He watched her for a moment, then slowly stood and padded to her side, resting his chin on the bed near her hand. Emily blinked, then reached for his fur fingers, curling into the warmth of it. "You're the reason I'm still breathing," she whispered. "I keep forgetting that Bailey didn't move." He simply leaned into her touch. Later that afternoon, a soft knock came at the door. The handle turned slowly, and a nurse stepped inside. She was a thin woman in her 50s, Nurse Linda Graves, with wispy gray-blonde hair and a gentle, steady way about her. Linda was known for her calm patience, especially with elderly patients or children, and she had a quiet laugh that made even the worst nights feel lighter. "Sheriff," she said with a nod, "there's someone here to see you." Emily sat up a little straighter. "Who?" But instead of answering, Linda stepped aside. And there stood Noah. He wore a blue winter jacket 2 sizes too big, the sleeves bunching around his wrists. In his arms, he held a plush golden retriever, the toy's ears slightly flattened from too much hugging. His glasses were smudged. His boots still had snow clinging to the edges. Sarah stood behind him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "He asked to come?" Sarah said softly. Emily smiled faintly. "Come in, kid." Noah stepped inside, hesitated, then walked straight to Bailey and knelt down. He hugged the dog first, burying his face into the golden fur. Bailey licked his cheek once. Then Noah turned to Emily, lifting the stuffed animal. "For you," he said. It was only 2 words, but for Noah it was a song. Emily stared for a long moment. Then she reached out and took the plush. "Thank you, Noah. He looks just like Bailey." Noah nodded once, then crawled into the chair beside her bed, quiet and content. Bailey resting across his legs. Sarah watched her face caught between awe and disbelief. This morning, she said softly to Emily, "He asked to go to school." Emily raised an eyebrow. "That's, a miracle." Sarah replied, "He hasn't gone since last year. The noise, the chaos, it's too much. But today he said he wanted to try, and he asked if he could take the toy." Emily looked down at the stuffed golden retriever now in her lap. "His shield." "His reminder," Sarah said, "that even in the worst moments someone brave shows up." Emily swallowed the knot in her throat. She looked at Noah, who was now humming softly, stroking Bailey's ear. "You and me, both kid," she murmured. The next morning, Emily took her first steps down the hospital hallway. Every muscle in her body screamed, but Bailey matched her pace perfectly. Offering silent, warm support at her side, nurses and orderlies stopped to smile. Not just because of her return to movement, but because of the bond walking beside her. In the elementary school across town, Noah stood in front of the classroom door with Sarah at his side. He clutched the stuffed Bailey tightly in both hands. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, just nodded and walked through the door. It was only half a day, but it was the first day. Later that week, a drawing appeared on Emily's bedside table. No one knew how it got there. It was scribbled in crayon, the lines shaky but sure. A picture of a boy, a woman with a badge and a golden dog between them. Above it, in block letters, "Brave like Bailey." Snow had begun to recede from the streets of Pinewood, revealing a town emerging slowly from hibernation. Sunlight came earlier now, stretching golden fingers through the cracks of every window pane, warming the floor tiles of the sheriff's office, and reminding those inside that spring was near. But for Sheriff Emily Walker, warmth had not yet returned. She stood before the mirror in the department's small locker room, adjusting the collar of her uniform for the first time in weeks. The tan fabric still sat stiff on her shoulders, the badge heavy against her chest. Her movements were measured a little slower than before. The wound beneath her ribs, though healing, still ached when she twisted too far or breathed too deep. But she wore the pain like armor. She had something to finish. Bailey sat by the locker bench, his eyes following her every move. He seemed to know what was coming, knew it from the tone of her voice, the way her posture had straightened, and the tension that lived just behind her eyes. He had watched her struggle through physical therapy, watched her wince through every stretch, and now he watched her walk without hesitation, and still he stayed close. Outside, Deputy Marcus Klein leaned against the department SUV, his coffee steaming in the crisp air. He wore a gray undershirt and a utility vest, his sidearm holstered but his stance alert. He straightened as Emily stepped out. Bailey at her heel. Back in uniform, huh? He said, a hint of approval in his voice. Emily shrugged. Couldn't let the badge gather dust forever. Marcus took a sip of coffee. "You really ready for this?" "No," she said honestly. "But I need to do it anyway." They stepped into the briefing room where a few familiar faces had already gathered. Carla Morris, the young dispatcher with curly hair and an empathetic streak, was pinning satellite printouts to a corkboard. Two deputies sat at the long table. Jared Sims, red-headed, wiry, and methodical, and Dana Ruiz, dark-eyed, broad-shouldered, with the calm presence of someone who didn't blink under pressure. Both had transferred from larger towns but had grown to care deeply about Pinewood's sleepy streets. "Got something new?" Emily asked, eyes on the map. Carla nodded. Stepping aside, Traffic Cam picked up the same black panel van from the Miller property. It was spotted 3 days ago, just before midnight, headed west past the grain silos. Emily studied the image, blurry but clear enough. No license plate, no markings. The silos haven't been used in over a decade, Marcus added. Too remote for casual activity. If they're running weapons, it's the perfect cover. Emily's jaw tightened. That's where they're nesting. Carla crossed her arms, anxious but composed. "So what's the plan?" Emily turned toward the whiteboard and picked up a dry erase marker. "We're going to watch the place first. No storming in, no heroics, just surveillance until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Once we've confirmed movement, we mobilize." Dana spoke, her voice low. "And even, how many do you think we're up against?" "At least 2 confirmed, possibly more. These aren't locals. Whoever shot me knew how to move. That's not some kid with a bad temper that's training." Bailey let out a quiet growl. Not loud, but enough to pull everyone's attention for a second. Emily glanced down and gave his ear a soft scratch. He agrees. They spent the rest of the day preparing gear checks, communications drills, reviewing old blueprints of the silo structure. It was a maze, multiple levels, collapsed staircases and rusted catwalks. It would be dangerous in daylight and almost suicidal at night, which of course meant they would wait for the cover of dusk. Back at home that evening, Emily sat on the porch of her small farmhouse just beyond town. She cradled a mug of herbal tea, her ribs aching after a long day. Bailey lay at her feet, his head resting on her boots. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and tangerine. Emily watched the light fade and thought about what it meant to return, not just to her job, but to the version of herself that believed she could still protect something. "Think we're ready?" she asked aloud. Bailey's tail thumped once. Inside her house, resting on the kitchen counter, was a crayon drawing gifted by Noah. It was the same one he'd given her at the hospital. Her Bailey and Noah beneath a big golden sun, the words written at the bottom in clumsy but proud lettering, brave like Bailey. She touched the paper just for a moment. Tomorrow they would move, and this time she wouldn't be walking into the dark alone. Night settled over Pinewood like a held breath. The wind had quieted, and the town seemed wrapped in velvet darkness, save for the occasional flicker of porch lights and the soft hum of distant generators. But out beyond the western edge of town, where the trees grew thicker and the silence deeper, something stirred. Emily crouched low behind a line of rusted grain hoppers at the edge of the abandoned silo complex. The smell of dust and decaying grain hung in the air like a warning. Beside her, Bailey lay flat, his golden fur blending into the low brush. Ears perked, breath slow and controlled. She glanced back at her team. Marcus knelt behind a broken stack of pallets, rifle cradled in his arms. Jared and Dana had split to flank the north and east corners of the silo. Carla remained at command post in the mobile unit 2 miles back, relaying updates through the comms system. Her voice, steady and precise, crackled softly through Emily's earpiece. Thermal. Drone confirms 2 subjects inside movement near the 2nd floor. Possibly armed. Emily pressed the mic at her collar. Copy that, wait for my signal. She turned to Bailey. Ready, he gave a quiet huff. They moved. Emily led the way along the southern wall, the concrete crumbling under her boots. The moon cast long shadows, and every sound, every creak, every whisper of wind felt amplified. She reached the lower door and signaled Bailey stayed pressed against the wall, eyes scanning. She slid the door open silently and stepped inside. The air changed instantly, cooler, denser. A flashlight flicked on. Emily kept it low, scanning the space. Sacks of grain lay forgotten. Tools rusted in their holders. Then footsteps above, quick, nervous. They knew someone was coming. Move now, she whispered into her mic. Suddenly, noise exploded. Wood shattered. A shout rang out from the upper level. Marcus's voice cut in. Suspect 1, fleeing north stairwell, intercept. Emily responded, already moving. Bailey stayed close, feet silent, eyes locked ahead. They ascended the central stairwell, the metal groaning underfoot. The upper deck had no railings left, just rust and broken light filtering through old skylights. Then she saw him. A tall man, mid-30s, with a tight black jacket and a shaved head, held a knife in one hand and a pistol in the other. He spun when he saw them. No hesitation. He raised the gun Bailey launched. Time fractured. The gun fired once, sparking against a beam beside Emily's shoulder. Then Bailey hit the man mid-torso with the full force of his weight teeth clamping down on the man's forearm. The pistol clattered to the floor, sliding out of reach. The man screamed, stumbled back, and swung the knife. Emily shouted, already raising her weapon, but she was too far. The blade slashed downward. Bailey cried out a sharp, pained yelp and dropped to the ground. Emily fired. The suspect collapsed, the knife falling from his grip, his eyes rolling back. Emily rushed to Bailey. He was down his flank, bleeding from a deep gash just behind his shoulder. He whimpered, tried to rise, but staggered. Hey, stay down, she said, dropping beside him. I've got you. You did good. You did so good. Her hands moved quickly, pressing gauze from her field kit against the wound. Marcus appeared seconds later, breathless. Second suspect in custody. You okay? Emily didn't look up. Bailey's hit a beat of silence. Then medics are inbound. They carried Bailey out on a stretcher improvised from a canvas tarp and 2 poles. His eyes stayed on Emily the entire time. She never left his side. Back at the sheriff's station under warm lights and surrounded by her weary but triumphant team, Emily stood before a table filled with evidence, weapons crates, maps, burner phones. The network was larger than they'd thought, but tonight they had cut off a major vein. Jared leaned against the wall, unwrapping a protein bar. That dog, he's a damn hero. Again. Dana added, rubbing the back of her neck. Second time he saved her. Marcus said nothing, just gave a tight nod. Later that night, Emily sat at the Pinewood Vet Clinic where Bailey rested on a padded mat, his side stitched and wrapped. He was sedated, but his tail thumped once when he heard her voice. Dr. Harriet Bloom, the town's veterinarian, a wiry woman in her 60s with short gray hair and square glasses that always seemed to slide to the end of her nose, stepped beside her. He's lucky, Harriet said, missed the lung. Deep but clean. He'll recover, Emily exhaled. He always does. She knelt beside Bailey, brushing her hand through his fur. You never hesitate even when I do. From the door, Sarah and Noah watched silently. Noah clutched his plush. Bailey, his eyes wide but not frightened. He stepped into the room, walked to the real Bailey and knelt beside him. He's going to be okay. Noah asked. Emily smiled. He is, thanks to you too. Noah looked down and whispered something only Bailey could hear. Then he gently placed the toy beside the real dog. Together they sat like that sheriff child and the dog who had once again run headfirst into danger without blinking. The spring morning broke clear and full of promise. Golden sunlight spilled over the rooftops of Pinewood, glinting off windows, warming the pavement, and turning every budding tree into a blaze of green and white blossoms. It was the kind of day that felt like a beginning, though for Sheriff Emily Walker, it marked the closing of a long and harrowing chapter. She stood before the mirror in her bedroom, dressed once again in full uniform. The tan of her shirt was pressed clean, the gold star pinned over her chest. Her auburn hair had been gathered into a smooth, low braid. The lines of exhaustion around her eyes softened, but still there. Her ribs no longer ached with every movement, though she moved carefully out of habit. She glanced down at her reflection, then bent to fasten the polished black boots she hadn't worn in over 2 months. At her feet, Bailey sat like a sentinel. The stitches along his side had been removed just 2 days earlier, and his fur had started to grow back over the scar. Though he was clearly still recovering, he held his head high, his golden eyes bright with energy. His tail thumped once when Emily straightened. "You ready?" she asked, adjusting her badge. Bailey gave a low woof, his body rising with the same determined grace he'd always carried. He walked beside her as they left the house, a quiet, living symbol of everything they had survived. Outside Pinewood was gathering. In the small courtyard behind the sheriff's department, rows of folding chairs had been set up and townspeople filled them quickly. Children in school uniforms sat cross-legged near the front, their faces eager and flushed. Parents stood behind, chatting, some still in work aprons, others in Sunday best. Homemade signs fluttered in the breeze. One read, "Welcome home." Sheriff Walker, while another, held by a pair of second graders, said, "Bailey for mayor." At the center of the crowd stood Mayor Henry Cross, a short, round man with a thick mustache and kind, watery eyes. He wore a suit that was slightly too tight and had a tendency to speak with his hands. He was known for his awkward speeches, but heartfelt sincerity. Beside him was Reverend Olivia Kane, a tall, elegant woman in her late 50s, with silver hair worn in a soft twist, and a calm voice that could settle a whole church with a single word. She had counseled the town through lost storms, and now this long-awaited recovery. When Emily stepped through the rear gate, the crowd quieted. Bailey walked beside her, head, high tail swaying gently. Murmurs rippled through the people, and then applause. Not loud, not showy, but warm, honest, filled with gratitude. Emily paused for a moment. The sun caught her badge, and for a heartbeat she allowed herself to feel the weight of it, the honor, the burden, the healing. Then she stepped forward. Mayor Cross raised his hands. "Good folks of Pinewood," he began, voice trembling with emotion. "Today we welcome home someone who walked through fire and brought back something more powerful than justice. She brought back hope. He gestured to Emily. "Sheriff Walker, you remind us what courage looks like. And, Bailey," he looked down at the dog who tilted his head in response, "you remind us what loyalty truly means." Cross turned to his assistant, who stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. Inside it was a medal shaped like a silver paw print encircled with oak leaves, an emblem of Pinewood's highest civic honor. "Bailey, the mayor," continued smiling, "by unanimous vote of the town council, you are hereby awarded the Pinewood Medal of Valor, for bravery, for sacrifice, and for saving the soul of this town." Carla, the dispatcher, let out a soft cheer. Marcus clapped once, slow and firm. Dana and Jared nodded from where they stood along the back arms, crossed, but smiling Bailey, of course, just looked up at Emily. That was when Noah ran forward. He had dressed himself for the occasion in a too-big button-up shirt and clip-on tie. His hair was combed flat, his glasses newly wiped. He clutched his plush Bailey in one arm and reached out with the other, wrapping it tightly around the real one. Bailey lowered his head, nuzzling against the boy's neck. The crowd quieted again as Emily stepped to the microphone. She didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice was steady. "I've worn this badge for 10 years. I've stood in courtrooms, crime scenes, and chaos, but I've never stood in a moment like this. I didn't know how much I needed all of you until I came home." She looked down at Bailey. "He never left my side, not in pain, not in fear, not in doubt, and neither did any of you." She scanned the faces in the crowd, Sarah near the back, holding back tears. Carla, hand over her heart. Even Dr. Harriet Bloom, arms crossed, but eyes shining. Sometimes, Emily said, the hardest thing isn't surviving. It's deciding to keep going, to return, to believe that healing is possible not just for the body, but for the soul. Looked at Noah. And sometimes the bravest hero isn't the one with the badge. Sometimes it's the child who chooses to try again. The crowd was silent. Then someone began to clap, and then another, until the entire square was full of the sound of hands applauding, not just a sheriff or a dog, but a story of rising, of enduring, of becoming whole again. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and Pinewood returned to its gentle rhythm, Emily stood alone by the department steps. Bailey sat beside her, the metal glinting on his collar. The sky above was deepening into purple, and the town felt smaller, safer, like a place where goodness had found a way to bloom. "Let's go home," she said. Bailey rose and walked beside her, the rhythm of his pause steady, unshaken. Tomorrow would come, but tonight they had arrived. Sometimes the greatest miracles come, not with thunder or fire, but on 4 paws, with quiet eyes and unwavering faith, in the stillness between tragedy and triumph. God often speaks through loyalty, through the courage of a child, or the devotion of a dog who refuses to leave our side. Bailey wasn't just a dog. He was a vessel of grace sent to remind us that healing isn't always loud. It's in the decision to get back up. It's in the small steps. It's in the moments when love stands guard over fear. Sheriff Emily survived because she believed, and because others believed with her. Little Noah stepped forward, not because the world changed for him, but because one soul, furry and golden, showed him that faith could walk beside him. In our everyday lives, we face battles. No one sees pain, doubt, loss, but there is a power greater than our fear, and his name is whispered in every act of love. Let this story be a reminder that God often sends help in unexpected forms through people, through animals, through those who carry light into our darkness. If this story moved your heart, please share it. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of hope and courage, and may God bless every soul watching this. If you believe in the power of love, loyalty, and the silent miracles around us, comment below with a simple word: Amen.